Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Branden.
You meddled in my business and took what I deserved away. You took advantage of my good nature. Well, I think there's something you should learn here. For as good as a man can be, also can he be as bad. And another thing you should learn is that when you visit evil upon someone, be assured it will revisit you. And that is what is happening.
You're listening to episode 118, Aggrieved.
My name is Marvin Heemeyer. Today is, let's see here, April 13th, 2004. I am making this tape. I thought I should make it a year ago. Made part of it, didn't like it. Really didn't think it'd make any difference if I did make it, but a good friend of mine said I should make it. He said I should sit down in front of a videotape machine and do it, but you're just going to have to take my word that this is Marv Heemeyer.
There's always two sides to a story. And according to Marvin Heemeyer, the town of Granby made his life hell. But according to the town, he did it to himself. But either way, he would have his revenge.
And as you can imagine, people are trying to figure out why this may have happened, but the number of the places that he hit, they all appear to be connected to this dispute that Heemeyer had with the town of Granby. This is a dispute that dates back 3 years ago. He actually sold his muffler shop about 7 months ago. So this is a dispute that has been going on for some time, and a lot of people knew about it, but no one expected something like this to happen yesterday.
Marvin Heemeyer, or Marv, was from South Dakota. He went into the military and would be stationed in Colorado. While in the service, Marv excelled. He was naturally gifted at understanding the mechanics of just about anything. He was extremely hardworking with a real aptitude for fixing engines, and his welding skills were superb. When he was discharged from the service, he decided to stay in Colorado and began to build a life. First as an employee for a muffler business in Denver, but quickly realized he could do it himself, prompting him to start his own business. A wife and children would never be in the cards for Marv, but he did build a successful muffler repair business, which he would sell, prompting him to move to Grand County, near a town called Granby, which is about 85 miles northwest of Denver. A small town known for industrious, hardworking families. But there was a pecking order. And like most small towns, people knew each other's business.
I decided that, I probably ought to buy some property up here to have something to do, so I looked at this three lots and the two little cabins that I'm living in here right now, and had a beautiful view, and the price was really cheap, so I bought it.
In April of 1992, Marv heard about a property in town. It had been foreclosed on and was going up for auction.
Great building, wasn't the best location, but it was a good building, and had 2 acres of ground.
So, Marv goes to the auction with the intent of buying that property. But he wouldn't be the first to make a bid. A man he didn't know at the time, Cody Docheff, who was the owner of Mountain Park Concrete, would put in a bid of $35,000. Something else that Marv didn't know at the time was that a guy named Gus Harris, who was sitting beside Cody, had plans to finance the property for him, but he told Cody that he wouldn't pay more than $50,000 for it.
They had a bid for $35,000 from some guy up in front, and so we were going to pay $66,000. I started waving at them; they couldn't see me. So finally, they caught my bid. So I had a bid for $40,000, and this other guy, I couldn't believe it. I didn't know who he was. He jumped up on his chair. That's how I knew where he was. And I was looking back, and of course, he bid $45,000. And of course, I bid $50,000, and was waiting for him to bid, and he wouldn't bid. So I got the property for $50,000.
According to Marv, immediately after his bid won the property, he met Cody Docheff up close.
Come to find out, his name was Cody Docheff. He came back there and introduced himself to me about the rudest, most arrogant person I mean, this guy's just a fucking asshole. Come back and just introduced himself kind of by just giving me a tongue lashing for about 10 minutes about, who I thought I was and what I was going to do with the property.
Marv says at the time, he wasn't emotionally attached to the property, which is why he offered to sell it to Cody right then and there.
He didn't want to have anything to do with it. He said, bullshit. He says, I only got... Gus Harris was his buddy there sitting beside him, I guess. Gus was sponsoring the whole financing on this thing, and Gus wasn't going to pay more than 50 grand for it. And I says, well, I'm sorry, but I says, I can't just not come down here and spend my money and waste my time and not, make some money on it. So I offered it to him that day for what I was going to sell it to John for, because I could tell the guy was pissed off, and I wasn't there to piss off any people. I mean, this is the only guy of all the properties that sold before his that was doing any screaming at anybody during the auction. I mean, 160 properties were sold that day, and this is the only fool that didn't come down there with enough money to buy his property. I mean, this shows you how day late and a dollar short this fool is.
Marv would come to find out that he would get more than he bargained for when he got a hell of a deal on that property.
Decided that I'd start a marker shop, and I think I started that either late 92 or in late 93. I don't remember anymore.
Marv was new to the town of generational families and wealth. Even so, he gained a reputation in the community of taking pride in his work and was known to be the best welder around. And he really wanted to make a good impression with the town.
It's a small community, and, I need to fit in.
In his free time, Marv pursued his passion, which was snowmobiling. And life was good for Marv. Until he was told that he needed to hook his business into the town's water and sanitation main line. When Marv had bought the property, it only had a concrete mixer tank as a septic. And in the summer of 1992, a representative from the city would tell him that he needed to be annexed into the water and sewer district, which he expected to go through without a hitch. However, when he arrived to the board meeting about the hookup, he found out that it wouldn't be that easy. Ron Thompson was on the board of the sewer district. Now, he and his family would be described as a Granby legacy family, which meant they'd been there for generations, they had money, owned a lot of land, and also the family business was excavation. Now, the closest sewer hookup was hundreds of feet away from Marv's property, which meant to hook up, he'd have to build a long line to connect to the main. And to do that was going to cost him more than $60,000. An easier path was through an easement by the property next to him. But in order to do that, he'd have to go to his neighbor, Gus Harris, who owned the property closest to where he needed to hook into. You've heard of Gus before. This is the same Gus Harris who had plans to finance the property that Marv had outbid his friend Cody Dochev at the auction.
This maintenance easement was a pretty big obstacle, and they basically told me, the board did, in the fall of 92, that I would never have water and sewer there until I got this maintenance easement from this Gus Harris guy.
And that's when he says he realized that people in the town weren't happy that he'd gotten a screaming deal on that property.
And I found this out later, people are pretty angry with me, They didn't know how to play by the rules. I played within the parameters of what was supposed to be done. There were 160 properties sold that day, and I bought it just like everybody else bought their property. And, there's no reason why didn't this guy have enough money to buy this property? I mean, it was an auction. He should have known that there was going to be people bidding against him, but I honestly believe he thought he was going to get it for next to nothing. And I believe that because I think the word was out in the community that he wanted it.
The thing about Marv is that he was diametrically opposed to the idea of a good old boys club. And that's what he perceived was happening to him. That instead of these people appreciating him for being a self-made man, that through hard work and business savvy, he had been able to buy that property, he believed they were holding it against him. He felt that Gus Harris, the man who was going to finance the money to Cody Dochev to buy that foreclosed property, but wouldn't go above $50,000, was in cahoots with the Thompson family. Remember, Rob Thompson was on the board of the sewer district, and that both were making it difficult for him to hook his property up into the main line. And this was just the beginning of his grievances with the town.
Had they not meddled in my business, this would have turned out, this whole thing would have turned out completely different. If they would have just left me alone, let me get on the water and sand, build the building, put the tenants in there, I could have had that rented out. I could have rented out the muffler shop. I could have sold the muffler shop. I could have subdivided that. Could have done a lot of things. But basically, what all this is going to prove when it's all over with, if it's ever all over with, which I doubt, it's going to prove, I hope it's going to prove to people that meddling in your neighbor's business is destructive for the most part. It's going to come back to haunt you. Or it can, I should say. It can come back to haunt you. And it can come back to haunt you in spades. And the only person you have to blame is yourself.
According to Marv, in 1998, the town went and spot zoned the 2-acre property south of his. And he found out that Cody Dochev bought this property from Gus Harris and was planning to build a concrete plant right next to Marv's business.
And rezone Gus Harris's 2 acres, which is directly south of my muffler shop. They did this under protest, which is in the minutes, and I don't know if he didn't know it, or if they were counting on the public to be stupid, or if they were counting on the fact that nobody had any money that they'd be able to protest this in court. But the town went and spot zoned the 2 acres directly south of, which was illegal in Colorado. They had changed the HGB zoning on that 2 acres to industrial. And because no one protested it within 30 days, it became law that they could do that. And therein lies a big problem. When I came along and, inadvertently bought this 2 acres, their plans were that Cody was going to buy this 2 acres and he'd go to the town and convert it to industrial, because now it adjoined industrial property that they had approved already. So now it was no longer spot zoning, but, approving it next to industrial zoning, and would be, they were going to get away with it. And they were going to be able to put this concrete plant right there next to all of those houses downwind of the town.
In the summer of 1999, the town would hold public hearings about the concrete plant. Marv was there and made his case that this wasn't a good idea to have a batch plant near residential housing, and he didn't want it by his business either. He believed his business would suffer because of the dust, the noise, and that the plant could have an impact on the water supply in the neighborhood.
I didn't want no friggin' concrete plant next to me, especially upwind of me. I mean, I was going to be right in the dust tail of this whole operation, and that wasn't going to work.
Ultimately, the town would issue a building permit to Cody Dochev to build a concrete plant, but Marv promised that he would fight it the entire way. Now, if you'll recall, the town was forcing him to hook his property into the main line for septic and water, which is going to cost him an exorbitant price, over $60,000, unless he could get that easement. This was something the town took him to municipal court for, and the judge would find Marv in violation of the town's covenant. Basically, until he paid to hook into the town's water and sewer, his muffler business could not be used for public occupancy or be open for business. And so the town began to fine him $100 a day, because despite the court order, he was still operating his business. In November of 2002, he wrote the town of Granby a check for over $3,000 for his fines. And in the memo, he wrote, "Cowards and Liars Department."
But because the town council had gone to the effort in 91 to rezone that property, and I had screwed up the town's plans, the town had a hard-on for Marv Heemeyer. They didn't stop to think. Marv didn't have any malice towards us. This is a sign to not do this. No, they kept it in their hardened hearts and said, we'll get him. And they started getting me in 1992 when they kept me off the sanitation district. They started getting me when Gus Harris would not sell the property to me. They got me when Gus Harris sold the property to Cody Dochev. They got me when they issued the building permit to Cody Dochev for the concrete plant.
Marv filed a lawsuit in district court against the town of Granby and the Dochefs, the family who wanted to open that concrete plant near Marv's business. Since Cody Dochef had bought that property from Gus Harris, if Marv wanted to get that easement, he'd have to ask Cody Dochef, the same guy who had gotten his concrete plant approved and was now being sued by Marv, who was very loud in his protestations that he did not want that concrete plant next to his business. The Dochefs contacted Marv and told him that they'd give him an easement if he dropped the lawsuit, but Marv wouldn't budge. 9 months later, a judge would dismiss his suit, which enraged Marv even further. But here's the thing. According to the documentary Tread, Cody offered to buy Marv's 2-acre property, offering $250,000, which Cody agreed to. Then Marv backed out and said $375,000, and Cody said he'd pay that. But apparently he backed out again. Either way, Marv believed the town was against him. Defeated, humiliated, he goes to his cabin and is sitting in his hot tub, stewing about his lot in life, how the town had conspired against him. But it was then that he had an epiphany.
I wept at times trying to understand why this was happening to me. And to do what I had to do to make these people listen, to learn, was just above me. And when I realized that one day when I was sitting in the hot tub, and I was weeping, a peace came over me that has only come over me a few times before in my life, where I knew that what I was doing was tough, but it was the right thing, and that it was above me. It wasn't me. I was doing this because God wanted me to do it. And I didn't understand it. I said, why did you ask me to do this? Is that why I've never been married, so I didn't have a family? Is that why I've always been successful, so that I would realize my reward before doing this task? I don't know. There are other things I can ask. Had I not carried my cross earlier, and now God had prepared me to carry this cross? I believe so. Carrying the cross willingly now. At first, I fought it. But it has to be done. And the world will write stories about how wrong I am and everything. And without a doubt, I wish it could be done a different way. But there is no way to make this right.
In the summer of 2002, Marv traveled to California for an auction. There, he bought a massive Komatsu D355 bulldozer. He had this monstrous machine driven to Granby, and at first, he parked the bulldozer on his property and stuck a for sale sign on it. Then, he shut down his muffler business and put everything up for sale, including the property he'd bought at auction 10 years before, and that massive bulldozer that he'd bought in California. At that time, he made a deal with himself that if he could sell everything, he would just walk away, forget his master plan, to teach the town a lesson. So he puts up the property for auction at $450,000, as well as the dozer at $33,000. Neither one sold. He took that as a sign that he wasn't supposed to walk away. So he began to execute the plan he had devised, sitting in the hot tub, weeping, after he'd lost the lawsuit. He brought the bulldozer inside the building and began his work. Eventually, he stopped going to the cabin and lived there in 2003, building a sleeping area so he could work 24/7 on the dozer. And all the while, he kept waiting for someone to stop him.
I spent the money. I fought the good fight. To come to realize that I had to do what I have to do now. It's a sad, sad way to do it. But it's a cross that I'm going to carry. And I'm carrying it in God's name, I believe. I truly believe this. I would have been caught. Something would have happened. There's still some time left. It still may not happen. It could be that the day it does start, the machine quits before I can get out of the building. It may quit right after I get out of the building. It may quit halfway through what I want to do. you know? And that's where it's supposed to stop, because God will have stopped it.
But he continued to work on the dozer, constructing a lift that helped him hoist heavy sheets of steel, which he melded onto the cab of the machine. And he stewed in his hatred of the town, thinking of all of their supposed secret meetings where they'd screwed him over and over again all these years.
And this will be the first time that I've ever done something like that the way they want it to be done, the way they do it, to do it in secret, to do things behind their back, to lie to you when you ask them what their plans are and they won't tell you. I've had to do that. People ask me, what am I doing? Oh, I'm not doing anything. I spent the whole summer of 2003 in that friggin' building, lived there without a shower for as much as four days at a time, working on that dozer, getting it prepared to do what I have to do.
Marv welded not just one, but 2 layers of steel plates to the cab and the engine of the dozer, and then fortified the gaps in between with poured concrete. Meanwhile, he left nothing to chance, affixing surveillance cameras on the outside of the building where he worked on the dozer night and day, so he was able to view everything that was going on outside through these monitors. And as the months wore on, he became more and more inspired by his plan, believing that not only was it his cross to bear, because it was God's will as well. He was further inspired by this notion when sometime in 2003, the business that he'd leased the 2 acres of ground to that surrounded his shop made an offer to buy the entire property for $400,000. And Marv sold it. But part of that deal was that they let him rent his workshop, the metal shed, where he secretly worked on the dozer.
Why haven't I been caught? Last fall, when Travis and Bob go to buy the place, they need to have their insurance man come in and see the storage building. They want to see inside. Now, I had put up a temporary wall, and I insulated that whole building that summer, and had started working on this dozer. I had this dozer about half done, but maybe 3/4 done by the time they wanted this insurance guy to come in. I had the whole cab armor on. I had about half of the engine armor on, and I covered it up with tarps and taped it all shut. And I says, maybe this is where I'm supposed to get caught. They're going to come in here, they're going to get nosy, they're going to want to know what's under this dozer.
Marv would cover the dozer and made up a lie saying he was retrofitting it for a scientist who was experimenting with diesel fuel and cryogenics.
I made up this story about this guy from Minnesota who was a professor at the university there, and they bought it. I says, but the lift goes when I leave. When this guy comes to pick his dozer up after he's done all this testing, we put this lift in so we could lift this big 800-pound condenser up on the back.
For a small town who knew everyone's business, they had no idea what was coming. As Marv took the winter off to go snowmobiling and liquidated his assets.
I sold the property for $400,000. But I stuck, $360,000 in my pocket. I didn't stick it in my pocket. I gave it away. It's gone. Because now money means nothing to me. I've given my house away. I do not need this cabin here in Grand Lake. I've given my snowmobiles. I've given those away this year. Everything is gone. What I own is just going to be a pittance compared to what I'm going to take. But hopefully the community will learn something from this and become wiser. And instead of hating their neighbor and keeping your neighbor down, they will love your neighbor. There may not be a lot of love here, because you can look at it and say it's coming from me. I've developed malice towards these people.
In April of 2004, Marv began making tapes, chronicling the lead-up, from his perspective, of what he alleged the town had done to him.
My name is Marvin Heemeyer. Today is, let's see here, April 13th, 2004. I am making this tape. I thought I should make it a year ago. Made part of it. Didn't like it. Really didn't think it'd make any difference if I did make it, but a good friend of mine said I should make it. He said I should sit down in front of a videotape machine and do it, but you're just going to have to take my word that this is Marv Heemeyer.
He wanted everyone to hear about what had happened and how he'd been wronged. It was around 2 p.m. on June 4th, 2004, when the quiet town of Granby would wake up in a way they'd never experienced before. Like a bomb exploding from the front of the warehouse. A behemoth slowly emerged out of the dust and wreckage of what had once been the side of the building, of the shop. The monstrosity came into view, the roar of the diesel engine, the creak of the treads, and the sound of destruction in its wake. Marv had transformed the bulldozer into an unstoppable war machine. He'd modified the Komatsu bulldozer into an armored vehicle, like a tank, with sheets of steel plating covering the cabin, the engine, and part of the circulating treads. There were 3 gun ports fitted with as many high-powered rifles. 5 video cameras were affixed to the dozer and linked to monitors inside, which provided Marv with visibility. He could see, via these monitors, images from the back, the front, and the sides. And these cameras were protected by 3-inch shields of bulletproof glass. He had also rigged up compressed air nozzles, which had been fitted to blow away any dust or debris from the cameras so his field of vision would not be compromised. The tops and sides of the dozer would also be greased with oil, making it so slick that it was impossible to climb up the sides. Marv had thought of everything, even welding himself inside the dozer. He had no plans of surviving the wrath he intended to rain down on the town he had come to hate. The sight of the bulldozer was incomprehensible as it began rolling toward the concrete plant. The front grille still appeared like a bulldozer, the familiar yellow color and the rotating foot treads. But that's where the familiarity ended. It now looked straight out of the dystopian action movie Mad Max. This bulldozer had been weaponized and would be unstoppable as Marv went on a 90-minute rampage. After plowing through the concrete plant, he went to other buildings, targeting the townsfolk he believed had ruined his life.
He was kept on backing in and out of different companies, houses, you name it, he was hitting them. It was one of the most high-tech things I've ever seen. I wasn't expecting to see pretty much a tank driving down the streets of Granby.
The residents could only look on in horror as the tank plowed through building after building. The police were powerless to stop it. A pipe had been shoved into the tread to try to immobilize it. That didn't work. Law enforcement threw explosions at the killdozer, which it would be dubbed, and fired more than 200 rounds of ammunition to no avail. Here's CBS News Colorado.
Copter pilot Mike Silva and reporter Luann Aiken covered it first from the air.
And it is just demolished. He's attacked this from, I believe, both sides of the area that he could get to. This is close to the batch plant, the concrete batch plant. A couple of the patrol cars together there wiped out the wall of that building. But look what he did to this four-wheel drive SUV, police car, sheriff's car. It looks like he almost rolled it a couple of times. It is just a total scrap iron at this point. Nothing there that resembles anything that was an intact vehicle just a couple hours ago.
A lot of screeching noise was heard as the tank easily pushed cars out of the way, making his way to his next location. At some point, a scraper was brought in from a landfill to try to block the dozer in. Marv easily pushed it out of the way. But as he continues to drive down Main Street, it suddenly becomes clear that he's having mechanical issues. Antifreeze from the dozer spills on the ground, and white smoke plumes out of the top of the machine as he heads towards a retail store. Here's a report from 9 News.
Mountain Park Concrete, Maple Street Builders, Thompson's Excavating, Gamble's Hardware, and the library inside Town Hall.
He was not a happy camper.
Town manager Tom Hale says the suspect, Marvin Heemeyer, was upset about the placement of a concrete batch plant next to his business.
He was upset that a batch plant was built next to his muffler shop.
But no one expected this.
It's something like you'd see on TV, you know, it's hard to believe.
Eventually, he ended up at the hardware shop, and what had once been unstoppable.
They were doing what they could. They couldn't do nothing.
It finally came to a stop. Somehow, it got stuck.
The engine of the bulldozer was overheating as he was tearing into the retail store. Here's former helicopter pilot Mike Silva, who had been flying the news chopper above the scene that day.
I think a lot of people don't realize the reason it came to an end, it stopped, is because when he plated the bulldozer, it restricted the airflow into the radiator. So what happened, you can see the steam coming, is it overheated and blew the radiator hose, and that's what actually stopped that bulldozer just before it went into the floor of that Gamble's store there.
A SWAT team surrounds the tank. Not long after, a single gunshot rang out from inside the dozer. It would take 12 hours of cutting with an acetylene torch, along with the help from a crane, to penetrate and lift the armor hatch, where inside they found Marv Heemeyer.
Early this morning at 2 a.m., they finally got in. Keep in mind, Jefferson County Bomb Squad first tried to get this thing open with small explosives at around 9:30. First time didn't work. Second time didn't work. The third time they used small explosives, they actually noticed what they thought was to be a door. They then used an acetylene torch to open up that door, and they finally got in to find Marvin Heemeyer inside.
13 buildings were damaged or destroyed, but amazingly, no one was killed. Inside the shed where Heemeyer had built his killdozer, he left a note that said, quote, "I was always reasonable until I had to be unreasonable. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things." Over the years, Marv has become a hero to some, believing that he was a man driven to extreme by bureaucracy and a rigged system. And there was a real fear that came with Marv Heemeyer's martyrdom. No doubt why, instead of preserving the killdozer, as it would become known, it was torched down into bits, and even those were destroyed, guaranteeing that no one would get a piece of the steel as a trophy to in any way glorify Marv. Former reporter Luann Aiken, who was in the air and witnessed the rampage as it unfolded, spoke to CBS News Colorado on the recent 20th anniversary of the carnage.
Yeah, the demolishing of the town, but then it also, a short time after, divided the town. Even 20 years later, it still is dividing the town. What do you think about that? Some people look at it as terror. Some people look at him as a hero. I mean, it's just...
people could have been killed. And what really upset me early on in our coverage there was when we saw him going after the library. And you think, children in the library, you know, summer school is out, and you try to remain objective, but it was just, what he did was so dangerous in so many ways. Mm-hmm. And not to get political about his argument with the city, but it was an ugly, ugly day for Granby.
Up next, Criminal Mischief bonus content. Here my co-host Branden Morgan and I discuss the case in more detail. And as always, thanks for listening. And remember, we're now available on YouTube, so check us out. From Cloud 10, Criminal Mischief is a pie-in-the-sky production recorded in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Branden Morgan and myself, music by Soundstripe. I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.